Welcome, welcome. This is the Enlightenment Show, and I'm your host, Laurie Schoenfeld. This is where Chicken Soup for the Soul meets the artist way with Nancy Drew. Our guest today is Teri M Brown, author of An Enemy Like Me. We're going to be chatting with her today all about her new release and a complexity that she finds fascinating about herself. Welcome, Teri.
Hello, how are you doing, Lori? It's great to be here.
I am so excited to have you back with us.
Yeah, I love being able to say that I've been someplace more than once. It's like, ooh, they liked me enough to invite me twice.
Second round, doing good. What is something that you are currently inviting more of within your life?
Okay, I missed the very last thing that you said. All of a sudden you bounced out. What am I doing what?
What are you currently inviting more of within your life?
Um, I think like hope and positivity. Those are two things that, my husband has cancer, and so there's a lot of up and down, a lot of things that are really kind of unknown and scary. And it would be really easy, I think, to focus there because it's kind of consuming. I mean, every day there's something. There's medicine every day, and there's different doctor visits, and sometimes it's even just telehealth, but there's always something going on. And I think it would be really easy to let that be the sole focus of what we're doing on this earth. And then not even just the sole focus, but the fear that goes behind all of the unknowns, because you don't know from one moment to the next what might be around the corner. So yeah, when I tell people, I've been putting out like health updates on my husband because a lot of people ask, and it's just easier to put out one big health update and let everyone know. And I always put at the bottom what I'm looking for, like in prayer, like, if you're a praying person, or thoughts or whatever you put out into the universe, if you'll do that for us. And the thing I always ask for myself is like peace, that idea of being able to live happily and fully despite things around you that are kind of like crazy and may feel limiting. So,
Hmm. I am saying a big, huge amen and second to finding peace within
yeah,
yourself.
it's not easy, and I'm not good at like the quiet, and I'm not real good at, when people talk about like meditation and mindfulness, I mean, it almost gives me anxiety just because I'm not a Zen quiet person. That's just not how I exist. And people will say, "Oh, well, you need to practice meditation." And it's like, I probably do. You're probably right. But just saying it that way has now made it where I can't even consider it. I have found, though, that I do meditate, but I do it in my own way, like what works for me. And what works for me is maybe walking along the beach. And at first, when I'm walking, my mind is just flowing and everywhere. And I notice by the time I'm done, I feel like calm and like I'm walking with the ocean and with the waves and with the wind, as opposed to against it. And like when I start, I'm kind of like this, and when I end, I'm not. So to me, I think that's my way of meditating, which is not the quiet sit in a dimly lit room kind of thing. Mine is I have to get out and like use energy so
Hmm.
that then my mind can say, "Oh, we're allowed to relax now."
I really love how you brought in that everyone does meditation a different way. And I agree with you that the word should is such a resistance. Like, that's an instant, like, and no.
Yes. And for me in particular, I lived for 14 years in an emotionally abusive relationship. And when I got out of that, I said, never again. Never again in my life am I going to have those kind of limits put on me where people tell me what I have to do and what I can't do and what I should do. And so when someone says to me, "Well, you should be doing meditation," my immediate response is like a 2-year-old. make me. You can't make me. Like, not. I get really kind of like probably over the top, no way, you can't make me do that. And so, yeah, your best way of coming at me would be to like leave meditation in a cute little invitation somewhere that I found it and then came to my own conclusion that that was something I wanted to participate in. Yes.
Mhm.
Should is not really going to get you very far. It's just never going to do it.
I see you, Teri, because you said an invitation. I'm like, ooh, a card. I'm now enticed to possibly look at.
Yeah, see, really, it's like, oh, well, this is like an invitation to join something. I might want to do that. Let me put that on my calendar and see what I think. It's a whole different thing than you should.
Mhm.
Well, it's like, no, I only should what I want to do. Thank you so much. But
Yes. Yes.
so.
Can you share with our listeners and viewers what an enemy like me is all about?
Yeah, so An Enemy Like Me is a World War II fiction genre, though it's really different than the traditional World War II stories. It focuses far more on Jacob, who is the soldier, but his family as well. Jacob is a first generation German American, so his family moved to the United States. He was born here. His dad died when he was young. He had a really hard time growing up because of the Depression, but he meets Bonnie. They fall in love. They have a baby. He's sure that life is going to be, smooth sailing from now on. And then what happens? World War II. Bam. And he now is kind of stuck because he is very much American. He very much wants to prove he's American. So he wants to go to fight in a war. On the other hand, he has this wife and this baby that he loves so much, and he doesn't want to leave them. In the end, he feels very compelled to go to war because of the people who hate Germans at this point. And he feels that he needs to prove that he's truly American. But he thinks he's going to fight the Japanese because, they're the ones that bombed Pearl Harbor. And in his mind, he can get behind that enemy. Right? They look different than him. They sound different from him. They eat different foods. Like you could pick out someone who's Japanese. He ends up fighting in the European theater in Germany and recognizes that he's more like the enemy than he is different than the enemy. And so that book explores this whole idea from his point of view, from his wife's point of view, and also from his 4-year-old son, both as a 4-year-old and then as an adult man looking back.
Mm-hmm. I love, you've done this so beautifully within your first book, Sunflowers in the Snow, but also in An Enemy Like Me, where you have multiple POVs. And what I love about that is instead of just getting one encounter on how one person is seeing war, you're bringing in multiple dynamics of what other people are also seeing and feeling that's also affecting them as well.
I think that, and I love doing generational stories because it lends itself so easily to seeing different points of view, because people of different generations see the very same event differently because of, life experiences and social norms for that time period and all the other things. But I think one of the things that happens when we talk about war is we look at the soldier's point of view. And we talk about the soldier's point of view. And in today's world, thank goodness, we talk a lot more about things like PTSD, etc. But very rarely do we look at the other viewpoints. Because although the soldier is at war, there are other people fighting in that war too. And that would be the spouses left behind and the children left behind and the mothers and the fathers and the aunts and the uncles and the best friends left behind and all of those people. And then I think the other thing is we often say, well, once the soldier's home and war is over, then it's over. And PTSD has helped us a little bit understand that maybe it's not over. But even then, I think people in their minds say, well, that's just a small sliver of people. And generally speaking, when the war is over, we'll give them, 3 to 6 months and now the war's over and we need to move on. But the truth is that person who went to war comes home as someone different. They've had experiences that have changed fundamentally who they are and how they think. And that means that they're going to come home as a different spouse and a different parent and a different sibling and a different son or daughter. And so this book explores that as well. The idea that, this little 4-year-old William, he was without his dad for 2 full years. And when his dad came home, he was a different man. And then we see William now as a man in his 60s who's reflecting on how difficult growing up with his father had been and how much he wanted to, please him and never felt like he could. And then we think, okay, well, if that affected him, more than likely how he parented was going to be different. So then you wonder, well, what about William's son? Did he parent differently because his father parented differently? And the answer is yes, it's a ripple effect. So, you have one generation go to war, and 3 and 4 and 5 generations later, it can still have an effect. And that's another thing I really want to point out. The idea of like, what is an enemy? And then the idea that war changes people, and it's not just for the 2 years that they're gone. It's not even just there for them. It's for everyone around them. And then it's for generations. It's for people they may never meet.
Mm-hmm. Did you have someone that you love or that you knew of that went to war that propelled this idea for you personally?
So it's interesting. My grandfather fought in World War II. And we're German American, though we've been in the United States since the 1700s. My grandfather rarely spoke about the war. It was a non-topic. I knew he fought. He was proud that he fought, but you didn't hear about the fighting. He had to stay in Germany for several months after the war, by the time you get everybody home and everything. I heard some of those stories, but those were usually funny stories. Things about, the time they found the chicken or things like that. And you could laugh. One time, though, as a teenager, he said to me, I always wondered if the person on the other side of my gun was a cousin.
Wow.
And my thought is we had been in the United States for 200 years at the point that World War II came out.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that still was something that bothered him. Can you imagine what it would have been like if you were closer and that those people really could be cousins? Like close cousins, not like eighth cousins twice removed, but like cousins. And when I was like fishing around in my mind for, like what's my next novel, that thought came to mind. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to make him a first generation German American so that everybody can feel it. Not just my grandfather, but that everybody can understand, because Jacob was one generation away from being on the other side of the war. If his parents had not moved, he would have been born in Germany and he would have been fighting as a German soldier. That's one generation. And I think that really makes you think like, wow, what does make an enemy?
Yeah. And I love too that you brought in, so I was thinking about my grandpa with how you brought in PTSD, where he went into the Vietnam War. Same thing when he came home. From my perspective as his granddaughter, he seemed very withdrawn and quiet, where my dad and my grandma had very different stories. And I didn't quite understand the grasp of war until he had Alzheimer's, and I was in like my 20s, and that was what he remembered. He went back to those pieces of the war, and PTSD was at its all-time peak, as if he was living it in that exact moment.
Right. And so, although the book is World War II genre, there's a lot of things that I think are really valuable for today. For instance, we have a lot of military who are deployed sometimes for months, years. How does that deployment affect the children and the wives left behind? And true, it's not necessarily in a war situation, but a lot of times these soldiers are in areas that are scary, that, things can happen. How do the wives handle the unknown? How do the children handle the unknown? So there's that whole idea. And then just the idea of like the xenophobia that existed then. Everybody was terrified of, we all know that they were terrified of Japanese. We've heard of the Japanese internment camps, and what a lot of people don't realize is there were German internment camps. You could be too German, and if you were too German, they could put you in a camp. Now, it was a little harder because looking at people who were German, you couldn't necessarily tell like who's German American. Japanese American, it was pretty obvious, and unfortunately all you had to do was look Asian in some manner, and they put you away. With German it was less so, but all you had to do was have too many letters going to Germany, too many of those letters going to someone that they believed was a Nazi sympathizer. They could do something like follow you and see that you had gone to some meeting and they didn't like the meeting you went to, and now you and your family have been labeled. And those kinds of things were happening. And during that period of time, what is now North Canton used to be called New Berlin, but nobody wanted to live in New Berlin because that's German and you didn't want that. And so that changed. People were changing their last names to sound less German. It was not uncommon for people to change their names, to change the names of their stores, to even move out of a community that they'd been in because the community was too German and they were trying to keep their family safe from that. Well, we have xenophobia today, and not just xenophobia, but other phobias of people that we put on our list of us's and them's, so not necessarily an enemy like you're going to go to war with them, but an us versus them kind of idea. And use this book as a jumping off place to say, well, how different am I from them? Because Jacob, he realizes very quickly, I'm more like the enemy. Like, that what separates us is so small that I'm actually more like the enemy. And I think that what we would find if we looked at the us's and them's is we actually are more like them than we want to admit. My husband and I rode across the United States on a tandem bicycle. So 3,102 miles. And we met all walks of life of people. I'm telling you, from different nationalities, different skin colors, different socioeconomic, political affiliations, religious affiliations, you name it, it was different. And yet we were able to get along with everyone we met, because what we would do is we would find something that would immediately bind us together. Like, what is it that we can talk about that will make us connect? And as soon as you connect, the things that could separate you don't matter as much. Like, you and I have connected on the level of books and chatting and this kind of thing, right? And we like one another, but quite frankly, I don't know anything about your political affiliations, and I don't care. And why don't I care? I don't care because it doesn't matter in the scope of this conversation and the friendship that we're creating. And it's okay that you and I could have different beliefs, and that would be fine. Right?
Yeah.
But if I were going to focus on differences, then it could be that you and I couldn't be friends. And I think that's just something that we need to think about is, how many times do we put someone in a them category when really, if you'd go get to know them, you would find out that they're not really a category at all. That's just a category you made up in your mind to stick people in. And that as you get to know people, I think it's perfectly acceptable to say there are human beings that I do not get along with and would prefer not to put within my circle. I think that's perfectly acceptable, but I don't think it's acceptable to say there are human beings in this category. We'll call it, a color or a religion, I think that's wrong, because I'm way more than any category you can put me in. And you're way more than any category that someone can put you in. And to be liked or disliked simply because, what if someone said, well, I don't like blonde authors? Like, how unfortunate. And so we can do that. We can make us's and thems all day long. I just think it would be so much better if we looked at ways to focus on like what brings us together, what makes us human, you know. And if we can focus on those connections, I think the world becomes a better place.
I 100% agree with you, Teri, because people, humans, we're all so complex. There's so much more to us than just one thing.
Right.
So many layers.
Well, and not only that, but even if we focused on the one thing, that one thing has more than one layer. You know, so you might put yourself in a particular group for a particular reason, but that doesn't mean that everything about you fits that particular group, you know? Like today is National Women's Day, right? And I'm yay! And I'm definitely a woman, okay? And I am a woman, but that doesn't mean that I'm like every other woman you've met. And that's okay. That's actually fantastic, right? But there are a lot of things, like I am not overly feminine. I don't I have trouble remembering to put on makeup. It's not my thing, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm less of a woman, and it doesn't mean that someone who does it even less than me is even less. I mean, there's just there's so many complexities that I don't think that you can group people into a us and a them, because what does that mean? You know? Like, you and I are not the same person, but we can be grouped in the same groups a lot of times. But I suspect there's other times we'd be in different groups. But isn't that okay? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And this is like what we're doing right here. One of the things that I love about doing podcasting and having these interviews is that it's so beautiful and fun to check in and ask those questions and get to know people and focus on the things that make them them. And we could learn from each other and connect with one another.
Oh, and the connections are so amazing because you find there's a richness that if you only stay within your small group of comfort, that you don't get to experience a lot of the richness that's out there in the world. I'm not saying that you're going to like change who you are and become something else because you've met other people, but now you've experienced other things in your life that you didn't experience before, and those experiences then can shape you and change you, even if it's just minutely, just a little, just so that even if it just opened up your mind to something that allowed you to see things just a little differently. I don't know, it's a little Pollyanna, I think, but I think it's real. I mean, I just think that if people would be willing to open up and get out of that comfort zone and be willing to meet people that maybe are on the edges of their comfort zone, like oh, I don't know, people are notoriously afraid of people who ride Harley Davidson motorcycles, right? And so you'd say, oh, a motorcycle gang, I don't want to be near them. Well, have you ever met them? Because I met a whole group of Harley Davidson riders who gave money to Toys for Tots. They did a ride and they collected toys. And these big burly guys that like would scare you if you were alone on the street have teddy bears on the back of their bikes as they're riding through, and they're bringing, and so there's just, people are so complex, like go out there and meet people, and it's okay not to like someone, but don't dislike them because you've now labeled them as something. You can say, I do not care for that person. And that is perfectly acceptable. But I really would hate to think that you would say that, I do not like that person because, and then you've put them into a group.
Yes. I love how you mentioned the richness of like people are so abundant. I feel like getting to know people, it's an abundance of just knowledge and growth, and it's beautiful.
Well, even just different ways of seeing things. For a while, I'm sorry, that's my COVID cough. For a while, I was seeing a therapist that helped me I felt very stuck in certain aspects of my life, and I just couldn't see beyond my own, crazy thought. And I would talk to her, and it wasn't like she said anything earth-shattering, but she would just maybe, like, reframe it or ask me, "Well, have you ever thought to look at it from, this angle over here?" And you'd stop and think, "No, I actually never did think of that. Why didn't I think of that?" Because as soon as you took one step to the left and looked at it, it was like, "Oh, well, it's not quite as big and scary and horrible as you thought," right? And so I think it's the same thing when you're meeting people. You learn things, you learn to see things, e even if what they believe is so significantly different than what you believe, it allows you to explore your own beliefs and make a determination. Is this really my belief? Yes, it really is. Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's okay that we don't agree with everyone. I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing to say, "Oh, no, I don't agree with that." But to have been able to listen to it, it allows you to, for yourself, determine, well, is my belief system really mine, or do I need to tinker with it a little? Is there something I've not explored before? I don't know. I'm not afraid to hear something that isn't what I believe, because I think that all information will help me grow and become who I'm going to be, either more of who I am, or will allow me to say, "Oh, well, I've always believed that, but never even looked at it before. Let me look at that."
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Absolutely. How do you think people can connect or reconnect with those after trauma?
Oh yeah, trauma is so hard because it changes, it changes the person who's
Mhm.
who's had the trauma. Um, I'm just a firm believer in you've got to be who you are and be real. And if you reach out to people on a real, honest basis without an agenda, you're not trying to, cross off something on a bucket list, or you're not trying to change the person or anything. But if you're reaching out in an honest way, in most cases, I think that it is responded to in an honest way. And then if it's not, then you just have to understand that that is on the other person. They're not at a point yet where they can do this, and that's okay too.
Mhm.
I don't know. You have to be who you are. You have to be who you are. And if you're not willing to be who you are, I don't think you're going to get very far in the world. I mean, you've got to be true to something. And I also think that it's perfectly acceptable to point out when you've made a mistake and say, all this time I've been saying XYZ and I've been wrong. I'm sorry if that hurt you, or I'm sorry when that hurt you,
Mhm.
because we're human and we make mistakes. And I mean, we're human. I make
Yeah.
mistakes all the time. I mean, constantly. And being able to say I'm sorry and knowing that the person on the other end is going to give me a little bit of grace because they understand that they too have made mistakes. Just to be able to say, "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I did not." When that came out of my mouth, I had no idea that it was going to be taken that way. Or I didn't even think, I didn't think, and it just out of my mouth. "And would you please forgive me?" And it's amazing. Most people are like, "Well, of course." Because all people are looking for is, I think, sincerity and honesty and you know, your humanity to my humanity.
Mhm. Yes, that comes to mind when you're saying that, the whole concept where you bring up grace of seeing yourself and also seeing other people and also hearing them and feeling like you're sitting with yourself of like, I see you.
Right.
I made a mistake. What are we going to do from
Yeah.
here on? And doing that for the person you're talking to as well.
And, sometimes the best thing to do is to accept that they made the mistake and then part ways.
Mhm.
Because this isn't going to be a good relationship for you. And I think it's perfectly acceptable. I think though that if you part ways and you haven't let it go on the inside, then you're the one that gets to deal with it.
Yeah.
You're the one that's left with the anger and nobody to throw it at, right? And so
Mhm.
you're the one that's going to have to deal with it. So, the best thing is to be able to give the person some grace, even if the grace is, I forgive you for what you've done and I'm moving on now. Like,
Mhm.
this isn't good for me, so I'm going to move on. There's no anger. I'm just not subjecting myself again. And that's okay. I think it's okay to be able to do that. But yeah, you got to find a way to let it go first, because otherwise you just drag it around with you and it just becomes that thing that shapes, all of your relationships from that point on. So,
Yep, going back into what you said before, that generational part of like
yeah.
it impacts everybody around you if you're not dealing with your own stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So, I lived with an emotionally abusive man for 14 years. And it does, it changed who I was. It changed how I react to things. And I had a great therapist. I feel like I worked through a lot. I went on the trip that I went on, and when I got done from the tandem bicycle riding, I felt like, wow, I can do anything I put my mind to. So I really felt like I healed a lot. But still, every now and then something will happen, and it's like, where did that come from? And so my husband and I call it swamp gas. And, he'll say something, and I'll feel myself responding, even though there's like this little part of me that's going, you do know that this is Bruce and that everything's fine. The rest of me is like on high alert and everything else. And I've learned to be able to stop and take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm experiencing swamp gas, lots and lots of swamp gas. So I'm going to take a little break, and then we're going to talk, because right now all I want to do is scream. And I'm going to say and do things based on some old paradigm that doesn't work now, but that's what's coming out, you know? Yeah, I had that happen the other day. I was coming back from an event, and I had tried to call him on the phone, and somehow his phone had turned to airplane mode. And so it wasn't ringing. And the whole way home, I knew he was angry at me. I knew he was angry that I had gone to this event and left him at home. I knew, and I knew. And by the time I came home, I was ready for a fight, because by golly, it was fine that I went to this event and I was ready. And I come in and I find, yeah, it was on airplane mode. He had no idea. He's watching television. He's not upset. Here, I've been angry for an hour and a half. I'm ready to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing to fight about. And I had to say, oh, swamp gas, let me explain to you where that came from and why.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's humans.
Thank you so much, Terry, for speaking to that. Of, even though you may have healed some things, that we all still hold things within our body and respond, even if our brain's like you mentioned, no,
Yeah,
this isn't really happening. Our body and our heart is still trying to figure things out.
yeah, yeah. And I think that, you need to find someone safe that you can talk to about that. For me, I had a great therapist that really helped me work through a lot of things. Now my husband and I are extremely close, and I can just say to him, wow, you just said this, and it brought back all of this that I know you didn't mean, but there it is anyway. Like, my heart is pounding, and I'm ready to fight, and I'm ready to swear, and I'm like this, and there's nothing on your end, so it's obviously on mine. And we probably need to talk about this, because I need to like figure out a way to put it in a box where it needs to be, because it's not helpful anymore. But it's yeah, it's real. It's real. And it's like PTSD, and it's like all of those other things that just kind of, they come up. They're your experiences in life, and they come up, and they just change how you interact with other people around you.
Mm-hmm. What is a complexity that you find fascinating about yourself?
Oh, that I find fascinating about me. I don't know that I'm fascinating. I just feel like I'm rather ordinary, like I just am me. Um, that I find fascinating. Oh, what a question, Lori. I'm stumped. Um, what I find fascinating about me. I think the thing maybe that makes me different than a lot of people I talk to is my willingness to really listen to other points of view, so I don't know if that's fascinating. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not always good at it. There are a lot of times where I'm holding on to my, my belief system and I've got hold of it strong and you're going to have to like do some fancy dance to get me to hear anything. But I do try. And I'm trying. The older I get, the more I'm trying. I think for the first years of your life, you just believe what your parents believe. And then the next years of your life, you believe exactly what they don't believe. And then you have to start figuring out, like, who are you really? I tell people all the time that I spent the first 10 years of raising children trying to not be my mother, which is crazy because what are you? And so I didn't know, and I had to figure out, well, what do I want to be? um and so the older I get, the more willing I think I am to listen to other people's life experiences. And maybe it's because I've had some ugly ones, and I recognize that that can happen to anyone. Prior to being in that emotionally abusive relationship, I would have said there was no way I would have ever found myself in that. It wasn't possible. I was too strong and too smart, and it would have never happened to me. And all it would have taken was one thing, and I would have walked out that door. And I was adamant, and I lived that way for 14 years. And I recognized so many things about how you get stuck in these situations and you don't see ways out, and that it has nothing to do with whether you're intelligent or not intelligent, or rich or poor, or it's not any of those things. I think being in those kinds of situations have helped me look at other people and recognize, most people are doing the best they can. And maybe they don't have very good tools. Or maybe the situation that they're in isn't lending itself to the tools they have always used in the past, and now they're stuck with a shovel when they need a screwdriver and they don't know what to do, you know? And yeah, it's kind of opened my eyes a little bit, and it's one of the reasons I love to write and create characters, because I can allow them to have these things happen, and then I can experiment and see, well, what are we going to do and how are we going to get her out of this? I want her to get out of it, but it can't be easy because I know how not easy things can be. And so, like, how many times is she using that shovel when she should be using a screwdriver? But, it's what she's got. And it takes somebody showing her, like, here's a better way, or here's another way, or allowing, or standing with her while she beats it with a shovel until she's finally exhausted and can now hear you say, there's this other tool.
Yes, I love the perspectives, Teri, of like looking outside someone's experience. It could be really easy for someone to say, well, it's just this easy. Like, what are you doing? Like, just get this tool. But the person actually in the experience, it's a
It
whole
isn't as easy as you
different
think.
yeah.
No,
Mm-hmm.
no. The number of people that have said to me, well, why didn't you just leave him?
Mm.
You're right. I should have. I mean, looking back on the situation, yeah, you're right. That would have been probably the best thing to do. And if I could have done it, I probably would have. But that's not where I was. And it took me getting to a particular point. I had drawn a line in the sand, and when that line was crossed, all of a sudden the piece of me that wasn't putting up with it anymore became the dominant piece, and then I was able to move forward. But until I got to that point, I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know You can't tell someone when they're ready to do something. And you can't give people tools that they don't know how to use. And you can't give people tools that they're not ready to use. I was seeing a therapist during that period of time, and had she told me you need to divorce him, I wouldn't have ever gone back to her. Not because
Mhm.
she was wrong, but because I couldn't do that. So, she would have been telling me, use this tool, and I would have been saying, there's no way, right? And so she knew better than to do that. And so she never said that to me, and instead she allowed me to figure that out on my own. But she gave me tools in the meantime that helped me kind of build different areas. And, and that's kind of what you have to do with people. And so when I see people now, I don't know, I just look and I think, well, their life experiences have brought them to this place, and their life experiences are different than mine. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or I'm wrong. It just means that they've seen life differently from a perspective that I can't see it, because this is who I am and I've experienced it over here. And neither their experience nor mine negate the other. My experience has been this and your experience has been that. And wouldn't it be nice if we could kind of listen to that? And it doesn't change mine, but it does kind of broaden my perspective of, oh, not everybody sees it this way.
Mhm. Gives you that investigation of, oh, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
invitation too.
I mean, I've had some really great conversations lately of things that, politically could be like really, I'm not even going to get into them because I try not to get political at all. I'm a novelist. I'm not a politician, but there's a lot of conversations that go on right now that could really drag people from one side to the other. And, we all have our places where we stand on that spectrum of where we feel comfortable. And I've had conversations with people who think very differently than I do. And what I've noticed is listening to them has not in any way hurt me. I haven't, I haven't, I shouldn't say I haven't changed my mind. I have softened a little one of my stances to the point that I now say I know what I believe, but I don't know where the line is.
Mm-hmm.
Like it used to be to me, it was a very black and white stance, and now there's a whole blurry area I don't know what to do with. There's still a black and there's still a white, but there's this blurry area that I'm kind of like, you know, but isn't that good? I mean, that's growth. That means that I'm willing to listen, but what they believe did not hurt me. Hearing it did not hurt me. I did not become physically ill. I did not need medical attention. It's perfectly okay to listen to someone who doesn't agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
You never know what you might learn.
We're going to take it to the inner child question segment. Are you ready, Teri?
I don't know, am I?
We're going to see. As a kid, how did you like to walk in your parents' footsteps?
When I was a kid, how did I like it?
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was a child, I wanted to be just like my parents. I mean, yeah, I mean, I was going to marry my dad, because I didn't know you couldn't. I mean, he seemed like a good enough, parent. I mean, a good enough spouse for my mom. Why wouldn't he be good for me? I think it's as I got a little older and started to see beyond their walls that they had drawn and their life. Mostly when I went off to college and saw a lot of different people from, I grew up in an area where everybody was just like me. I mean, we were all alike. Everybody was alike. There were very few differences. And then I went outside of that and I met people from a lot of different cultures that had different ideas. And it was like, wow, like this is big. So then I did just the opposite. So now I don't want to be anything like my parents. Like nothing. Like I'm going to be my own person. Watch me. And now I've kind of come down to this point where I'm a lot like my parents. I mean, they brought me up and I'm a lot like them. And I've also taken the experiences of all those other things and I've allowed myself to be something a little different as well. So.
Second question. When you were a teen, what was an endearing way that someone asked you out on a date?
Oh. So I wasn't allowed to date until I turned 16. That was just a hard and fast rule. And I had a 16th birthday party. So it was a boy-girl party. And I was just really excited about, this is almost like you're coming out party, here I am. I'm going to be able to date. And this boy actually gave me a present, but he got down on one knee and he handed me the present and he said, "And would you go out with me Friday night?" And it was like, oh my gosh. Yes. So that was pretty cool.
That was at your party?
That was at my party. Yeah, I actually came out of that party with 3 dates. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yes, Teri.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, I really thought it was. I don't know. Then of course came the actual dates themselves, and that's a whole nother. That's like a whole podcast in itself.
We'll have you back on for a third time, talking all about the dates.
All about the dates. Yeah.
Went well, didn't go well, and all the in between.
Yes. The boy that took me out and came the very next day to the house with a license plate on the front of his car with my name on it.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I didn't quite know what to do with it, so I used my parents. I said, "Oh, my dad will never allow that. That needs to come off the vehicle right. My father will not." And I don't think he would have cared for it, but I cared for it less. But I didn't know how to say, "What are you doing?" So yeah, I just blamed it on my dad. My dad will not allow that.
That's a solid go-to.
Oh, I have 4 children and I told all of them, whenever you need an out, you're welcome to blame me. I don't care if I would have, it doesn't matter. I don't care what the topic is. You're allowed to say, "My mother will not allow that." Mm-hmm. And I said, "And I'll back you."
We do that here too. My 13-year-old literally just asked, "Can I just use you as an excuse?" I'm yes, you can.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Why is creativity important to you?
I don't know how to not be creative. Like, I have voices that live in my head that demand that they be heard. But even when I'm not writing, I'm doing other creative things. I like to do photography. I'm not great at it, but I enjoy drawing and painting. These are not things that I would ever become professional at, but they are a way of me kind of like expressing the things that are going on in me. I have a lot of emotions. There are different people that have different levels. There's like my husband is pretty much, he's an engineer and life is pretty stable for Bruce, which is great. It's wonderful to have that, by the way. When you're me, I'm on a roller coaster and things are either up or down and everything makes me laugh and cry. Like sometimes they make me do both at the same time. I'm very emotional, and I think that creativity helps me kind of figure out what to do with all of that, because otherwise it's just in me. When we rode across the United States, the number of times that we would get off the bike, and it would have been a hard day, horribly difficult. And I'm a desk jockey. This is not my thing. I don't do this kind of thing. And it was huge for me. And I would stand on the side of the road and sob because it was hard and I could not imagine going any further. And my poor husband's like, oh, what can I do to fix it? That's like nothing. you have to let me cry. And I'd get it all out of my system. And then I would say, okay, let's go. And I'd get back on the bike because I just needed to get it out. Well, I think creativity helps me do that too. I mean, standing on the side of the road crying will work sometimes, but sometimes it's more fun to take a good picture.
Or do both at the same time,
Yeah.
Teri.
Yeah, I can do that. I can laugh, cry, and do lots of things at the same time. Everything really, yeah, and I talk with my arms. I'm just an emotional person, and it's just who I am. So, yeah.
I'm right there with you. My 13-year-old specifically, whenever we go to like a art performance or I'm playing the piano, she's like, "Are you crying again, Mom?" And
It's like, yes, yes, I am.
man, so
Yep.
beautiful.
It's so lovely.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and with this whole journey of becoming an author, everything makes me cry. Everything. Like the first time I saw Sunflowers Beneath the Snow as a book.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. The world had come to an end the way I was sobbing over it. Everything is just amazing. And I'm either laughing or crying, or like I said, both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we finished riding across the United States, so we stopped at the Iwo Jima Memorial, and you could see the flag. We're coming up the hill, and you could see the flag. And my husband said, "You see that flag? That's where we're stopping." And I started to laugh, and then I started to sob, and I'm doing both. And I don't even at this point understand why. I'm just, and we kind of come around a corner, and several of the family was there, which was wonderful. I didn't know that they were going to be there, and they're applauding, at which point I'm now laughing, and I get off the bike, and now I'm sobbing again. And it's just, yeah, that's just who I am. I just really experience life. And I think, I don't know, I think with writing in particular, the creativity for me is I try to take those experiences and put them into my characters, so that the reader, when they're reading the character, can laugh and cry with that character. That they can feel that. I may not have felt that exact emotion, like with Bonnie in this book. She completely falls apart because she thinks that her husband is, she realizes he's not coming home, and it's just finally is too much for her. Well, I have never felt that depth of depression, but I have felt depression. I have experienced it. I know those feelings. And so you just take that, and you find a way to I don't know, I play the game of like, well, I know what that was. What would it feel like if it were 10 times worse? And you just sit, and you just let it, and then you feel it, and then you explain it, So I don't know. I just like creativity.
Congratulations, my friend, on An
Thank
Enemy
you.
Like Me. And also, cheers to Sunflower in the Snow getting the 11th award.
Yes, 11th today. Yeah, it got I'm a finalist in the Book Excellence Award. I found out just an hour ago. So, yeah. So you're the first to know. I don't even have it out on my social media yet.
Congratulations.
Thank
I'm
you.
so thrilled for you. We're going to put the book link down below. If you have not read An Enemy Like Me, absolutely recommend. This is a fantastic book read. It invites a lot of different questions and POVs to really take a look at different perspectives around family, war, and connection. Where can our listeners and viewers find you, Teri, if they have any questions after the show?
Easiest place would be to go to my website, which is my name, TeriMBrown.com. That's Teri with one R. There you can find all my social media links. You could join my newsletter, which I would love for you to do. I have a contact page there if you just wanted to reach out and ask me a question. I love connecting with people about books and characters and ideas. And I mean, love my books or hate my books, reach out and talk to me. No, seriously, because, I just believe that there's not one book and there's not one reader. And so, if my book isn't your thing, that's fine. Let's talk about it. Let me help you find something that might be your thing, like I just really believe that that literature has that ability to tie people together and to make them think and talk. And even if you don't agree, that's, I mean, all the better, right?
I absolutely agree with you. It's been an honor to spend time with you again
Thank
today,
you.
Terry. Much love to you and
Thank you.
abundant success for your upcoming projects.
Thank you.
Thank you again for those who are watching live and will watch on the replay as well. We're so grateful to have you here. Remember, as you go about the rest of your week, to find the things that are working within your world. You are the creator of your own story. What steps will you take next? Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day.
Bye.